Now coming to humoral immunity. Humoral immunity is a part of acquired or adaptive immunity. You all know that acquired or adaptive immunity is something which is not with you from the time of birth. It is something that you acquire in due course of your lifetime. So we call it as antibody mediated immune response, or we simply call it as humoral immunity. Remember, it is one of the types of acquired or adaptive immunity. In humoral immunity, we have the B cells that play a very important role. It is not just the B cells. Along with the B cells, we have a special group of T cells which is called the T helper cells. The T helper cells actually help the B cells by releasing a set of cytokines. They release a group of cytokines which will help the B cells to rapidly proliferate. In response to the B cells, these will rapidly proliferate in response to the T helper cell cytokinins to produce two populations of cells. What are these two populations of cells which result from the rapid proliferation of the B cells? So we have the effector B cells, which are called the plasma cells, and we have another group of cells called memory cells. The plasma cells are the ones which actually secrete the most important protein that is referred to as the antibodies to fight against the foreign agents, isn't it? So these are the cells which secrete antibodies. So how does the helper cell recognize the B cell? So there is an antigen, there is some foreign substance that has invaded your system, and you will be surprised to know that the B cell is capable of carrying out a process called phagocytosis. So it phagocytizes the antigen and it presents the antigen to the T helper cell. So it is called antigen presentation. So once the antigen has been presented to the T helper cell, the T helper cell is very happy that it got to see an antigen, it got to detect an antigen. Now as a thanks to the B cells, the T helper cell is now going to release cytokines, and that will trigger rapid proliferation of B cells into two populations. And you know what this is called? This rapid proliferation is called clonal propagation, or it is referred to as clonal selection. It will divide and divide and divide into two populations. One is called the plasma cells and one is called the memory cells. I was telling you that the plasma cells are called the effector cells, and they are the ones which actually produce the antibody. Another name of antibody is immunoglobulin. It is abbreviated as Ig because it belongs to the globulin fraction of your plasma protein. That's why it is referred to as the immunoglobulin. So we saw how the plasma cells can produce thousands of, remember that each plasma cell can produce thousands of antibody per second. About 2000 antibodies per second is produced. And the fact that where do these antibodies go? Please remember, these antibodies are present and they circulate in all your body fluids like your blood, your lymph, your mucus, your saliva, your tears, your sweat. All these, and even the mother's milk contains antibodies like IgA, and some of these antibodies can also cross the placenta. That's why it is called humoral. What does humor mean? Humor actually means body fluids. Because the antibodies are found circulating in the body fluids, we call this type of immunity imparted, conferred by the antibody as humoral immunity. What is the function of the second class of cells which came through or came about by the clonal propagation of the B cells? The function is they remember the same pathogen. In case in the future you are infected by the same pathogen again, you contract the same infection, the response time will be reduced, your immune system will quickly jump into action, will quickly get into action and immediately destroy the foreign invaders because it has cells from the past or the previous infection. Those cells which are retained from the previous infection are called the memory B cells. So we saw that one important thing which you should not forget here is the fact that the B cells are capable of phagocytosis and they present the antigen to the T helper cell. That's why we can call B cells as antigen presenting cells. They present it to the T helper cell. A T helper cell is very stubborn. It will not recognize an antigen unless and until it is presented to it through the helper, through the B cell. There will be a special receptor on the B cell. All of you should remember this also. If this is the B cell, and there will be a special receptor which the B cell uses in order to present the processed antigen. The antigen is ingested and it is processed inside the B cell, and it is presented through a very important molecule called MHC class 2 molecule, major histocompatibility complex class 2 molecule. So a T helper cell is very stubborn because it will not recognize the antigen alone, but it wants the antigen to be presented to it through the class 2 MHC molecule. So this is a feature that you all have to remember. A T helper cell will only recognize an antigen not as it is, but when it is phagocytized, when it is processed, and when it is being presented to it through a special receptor which is also found on B cell. See, these MHC class 2 receptors are not just restricted to the B cell, they may be found in macrophages and other cells which are involved in phagocytosis, such as the dendritic cells. They are all called APCs. APCs are nothing but antigen presenting cell, because their job is to present antigen to the T helper cell. So this receptor which is involved in antigen presenting in on the surface of the B cell is called MHC class 2 receptor. And then I told you, as a thanks, T helper cell will release cytokines, and the B cell which is activated will rapidly proliferate into two populations, that is memory and plasma, and this process is called clonal selection. So this is the mechanism of humoral immunity or antibody mediated immune response.